Professor Enamul Huq's paper carries with it the aroma and the fragrance of beautiful tales of communion and friendship that have persisted between neighbors through history. The paper envisages border hearts as centers for cultural exchange, and I take this opportunity to request Professor Huq to share his thoughts on border hearts with us now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bose. This is my opportunity, a good opportunity for me to speak in front of all of you. This is, as I think you have eloquently described the scene for this discussion. As I was engaged in this particular work, it was looking at the border hearts and see whether how much it has facilitated the people-to-people connectivity. That was the primary objective of my research and looking into it. I just like what you have done, I have also gone through the history and realized that this was a border. There was no border before the partition of 1947. People never thought about that this is a border. In fact, the border, which was very interestingly, I have quoted it, that it was a drawing by Radcliffe without visiting the places, without visiting the people, and it has changed the front of the houses. In other words, the borders, which was previously looking at one side, the moment the border is imposed, they started looking at the other side. The front become the back, and the back become the front. That is how border has changed the life of the people. Now, in the history of Bangladesh and India after 1947, if you look carefully, it was a soft border. I don't think people, not my generation, the generation before, did not even see the border as strongly prior to 1965. So, what I understood that after 1965, the Bangladesh and Indian border, which was within East Pakistan, after the 65 war, there was a hard border. It was at that time probably the people realized that we are living in two different countries. Prior to that, they could travel from each other. It's like more of a current Europe prior to that you could travel across the border without thinking of crossing, having a visa and everything. So 1965 was one of the first turning point of the history, and it has created, I would say, it has changed the front of the houses. In other words, the backyard became the front. The people who are living, looking at the Kolkata as a bigger market, started looking at Dhaka as a bigger market from Bangladesh side. I'm just giving an example. And that animosity over time ingrained, and there was both because of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh was part of East Pakistan, created a kind of mistrust, and the border became a zone of conflict rather than a zone of friendship. So that is an historical starting point. It was 1971 during our liberation wars. It turned again. It was at that time the border became open, and it was from the atrocities people were trying to save, and it was again the border that opened up for us, and people realized it. Okay, this is almost like another same continent. We will share in the same culture. People across the border, having both religion, Muslims and Hindus on both sides, realized that okay, we have friends on the other side. So 1971 was an interesting turning point. However, when I look into this, what I see the turning point change again from friendship, from a same country to a conflict zone at the border in 65, back in 1971. And then in 74, things have turned changed when there was famine in Bangladesh. And when during the famine, again, if you look carefully, things have changed. And what is changed basically, there was a migration of people from Bangladesh side, and there was obviously people were looking at Bangladesh, and the Indian government started realizing that we need to do something on the border. And the turning point turned back again in 1986 when the first time Indian government realized, decided to open to the barbed wire. That was an interesting turning point. It was not only a hard turning point; it's a border with barbed wire, and that was the beginning of a real separation between houses, between cultures. So people maybe There are people on this side, they are married to the people on the other side, same village, but now they are not, they're totally separated. And that separation became stronger and stronger over time. I think it was until 2014. And mind you, even though India shares border with China, India shares border with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Pakistan, at Myanmar, but Bangladesh has the largest border with India. The longest border India has with anyone is with Bangladesh. So it's a surprising fact that most people don't see it, that we have the longest border with India, and surrounded by almost five different provinces, and they are all different languages. The the biggest challenge that happened after the, particularly with the partition, that I see is that the borders which were at the front to the market now become the back to their original market, means the new markets, which is the center of the country, so became a backward area. So the economic conditions of these people became backward. Connectivity, whatever was done on the border, was not in the interest of people, but in the interest of retaining the separation, and doing this. More interestingly, unlike many other countries, we also have a border with no man's land. Very interesting. And that land, even though it's no man's land, but it's not no man's land, there's ownership. And all the fences were done, interestingly, outside the no man's land. Interestingly, what it means that the no man's land, which is a land of someone else, either a Bangladeshi or an Indian, both sides, they had to cross that barbed wire to cultivate that. So it's very interesting. So when this study, when I found out that some people realized that after the barbed wire, after the conflict that has happened, these border people were almost like a police 24 hours. They were policed. So the conflict, the mistrust continuously grew over time. I think the biggest change that has happened after the in the recent past is when 2011, when the two governments, Bangladesh and Indian government, agreed on border huts. To me, that was the biggest turning point that has happened. The objective, apparently, was to access the bordering people, remote people now, access to the markets. Interestingly, on one side, in some cases, Bangladesh is probably the biggest market from some of the border in production region. In some cases, India is also the market. So it depends on the product we are looking at. Taking an example, and this was studied already by other teams. I'm not going to go into there, but this opening up of the border created an opportunity, and I have seen with example shown with example in my study that a girl was married. She was on the other side of the border. After the fence was created, she could not come back. Prior to that, she could. Now, after 14, 20 years, she eventually met her mother in the border heart. So it created, and this is something that it's like a separating, same house into two different parts. And some cases we have seen people, used to speak from on the no man's land area from the one side of the border, shouting at each other because there are families on the other side. So Border Heart actually created that opportunity of connectivity. And I think over that, the way I see it, is also created trust. Now, border area could be either become a conflict zone or it could be a friendship zone. And it depends on the policy of the government how to create that zone. If you create a mistrust among the people in the border area, it will always remain as a conflict zone. And having, as I said, like Bangladesh, the longest border with India, if you think carefully, is a country and it's a culture on both sides, almost very similar culture. I was even talking to, so in one cases, we're looking at Meghalaya, and there was a lady who said, okay, she's a Christian lady, and she said, I had never no idea prior to this border hard that on the other side people have a different language, because for her the border is so separate that she had no idea on the other side. And after the border her, she started counting Bangladeshi taka. She could greet a person and she could see that what she thought originally Bangladesh is a completely different culture, different group of people, everything different. No, that's not that much. You can trust them. So I think border heart created that kind of an opportunity between people to trust each other. And given this particular scenario, I don't see Border Hat as only exchange of goods and services. I also see our Border Hat exchange of friendship. I also see Border Hat as a exchange of, even learning languages. That people on the other side has a one language, on this side has a different languages. So that languages are also, and also building trust. So as we go into the future, I believe this should be seen as a cultural exchange, and I also see that this also should create an opportunity for them. We were talking to in one case with a lady in Sunamganj border, where she said, "Look, from the other side of the border, the price of oranges are so high, whereas I cannot sell it because I the nearest market from me is far away." Similarly, from Bangladesh side, they also see that on the these products in the Indian border side is higher, so we can sell it more. So I'm giving this as a livelihood change, which is also help these people on both sides. And finally, if I look into this exercise that I have done, I realize that it is possible, and I think we should all dream for that day when it will be a border with friendship. And in order to do this, is not just border health. We have to go beyond that border health. That's how I see. And the three strategies that I recommended: number one, we should bring back the idea of family reunion pass. So there are family on both sides, and I think family reunion pass it is no, is easier for them to travel, because if you ask them to get a passport, it's impossible for them to go to the Dhaka, so for example, in a Bangladeshi to come to Dhaka or nearest district and get a passport. These are very poor people living in the border, remotest villages, and asking them to travel to get passport and then the visa is a too much of a work. So this one strategy, I think this 24-hour pass to visit families reunion, these are mostly on that. That is what I thought that would be interesting, because it's not just these 11, 16 areas of border heart. All across, this is the longest border between Bangladesh and India, this situation exists. I remember seeing one video on I think National Geographic, where they were showing half of the houses in Bangladesh and the other half is in India, and the same family. That's how border was created, without really thinking that how this border was created, and without thinking this family is on both sides. The second important point, I think building trust is important, which I believe that is a tourism, cultural tourism. I myself traveled to Indian side several times on the Meghalaya region, for example. Beautiful tourist spot. Similarly, if you want to enjoy the beauty of some of the hills, you have to come to Bangladesh to see them. So interestingly, there are interests on both sides to travel across. So tourism is also a good example. And that could be organized tourism. I'm not talking about people crossing, but the organized tourism, people staying. There are one of the Asia's beautiful, most cleanest village on the other side of the border in Meghalaya. So there are markets that we can trade and we can use it. Religious tourism is another one that we can use it on both sides. And the third important point I thought, and this is an interesting one, that resource products are exchanged on both sides, but it's still unprocessed product. I think it is important that we can use no man's land in particular to bring in economic zone and investment into that area from both sides of the border. That will benefit local people in terms of jobs, give more value addition to this, and it will improve the friendship between Bangladesh and India. And borders, if you go travel across, as I said, if I've traveled from Netherlands to Belgium to France, you never see the border. That does not mean the country did not exist, but the country exists, and that kind of friendship and trust should be built. And I think Border has a good strategy to build that first step. Thank you. Thank you very much.